All right, welcome back to the AEC Disruptors Podcast. I get to open it once again. Chris is here, and we are also very happy to be joined by Bob Escher. He is he is the owner of Escher Design and also the founder of the U.S. Hemp Building Association. How's it going, Bob?
It's great, Jackson. Thank you for having me.
So when we have guests come on, we like to talk about the arc of your career. So what first got you interested in the industry, and what led you to the point that you're at right now?
Well, it's been an amazing journey. I've had my practice here in Dorset, Vermont, for just about 33 years now, and my focus has always been on second homes, luxury homes, custom homes, country clubs, libraries, and it's a really good market up here because we're sort of in southern Vermont. We're in a sort of a resort area of skiing and golf and tennis and hiking and all those great things where the Appalachian Trail comes through and everything. So it's been a really good run. But about 4 or 5 years ago, my son came up to me and said, "Have you ever thought of bringing hemp into your practice and building with hempcrete?" And of course, that was the last thing I've ever thought about, being in the market that I was. And he pursued me, and he pushed it, and we ended up going out to Denver in 2017 and met a couple of people, namely Eric McGee, who wanted to build a small hempcrete barn in his home, on his property in Denver, and Kelly and Allie from Left Hand Hemp, who were doing classes. And the long and short of it, we ended up building the first permitted hempcrete structure in Denver, which was a very simple 16 by 20 post and beam barn in the backyard of a suburban home. And literally that changed my life. I didn't realize at the time, but it was historic. And one of the tours that people had organized, a lady said that to me, and I sort of pushed it off and said, no, I don't think so. But in the end, it was. But you have to understand, my background in construction and architecture goes way back also to my grandfather and father, who were contractors in New York City back in the late 1800s, and my father took the company over. And that company, White Construction, built Yankee Stadium, the original one, Hayden Planetarium.
Oh, that's cool.
And I have distant relatives in Switzerland that were involved, that were the engineers for the Goddard Tunnel, way back. So it's been in my blood, and being in that sort of background, to come out as an architect certainly was disruptive in my family, but it also was a natural progression for that, because my father would, when I was a young boy, he would take me to his jobs, and other people's jobs. We were actually able to go out to the Sears Tower when it was being built. We actually went to the top of the World Trade Center, actually before it was the top. We were able to go to the very top of, I don't know if it was Tower 1 or Tower 2, but it was still just steel and concrete. And we were able to look down on the other tower, which was about 30 floors below it, still being built. So it always was something in my background that took me here. And so when the opportunity, and most importantly, the impact that this little building had on me personally as well as on my practice, I just felt it was an absolute natural progression to take my background, my family background, to another level. And that's exactly what has happened. And I think after looking at many of your podcasts, that today's discussion is going to be something totally different than any of the others, mainly because what my goal as the founding president of the U.S. Hemp Building Association, is to get the message out there to architects, engineers, and builders. And we have an opportunity to be part of creating a whole new design genre. We have an opportunity to create an industry. Now, when has that ever happened in our lifetimes, let alone in the last century, to be part of something at the very, very beginning? From the start, you have to understand, hemp was illegal up until 2000. Was it 2000? The Farm Bill in 2019, and it's new. It's an incredible material. It can do anything, and most of all, guys, it answers all the questions about the carbon footprint issues. It answers all the questions on how we can fix global warming. It's not going to happen overnight. I mean, remember this, we're starting from scratch here. But in the end, there's so many uses of hemp to be brought into the construction industry. And I'm talking of blending, okay? I'm not talking of fight by kick and scratch. We're going to take concrete out, insulation out. We're going to, become the leader of that. We're going to blend into this. And that's the secret, because the more hemp that gets put into materials over the next decade is going to slowly but surely take that carbon footprint down, because hemp remediates not only the soils of carbon and poisons when it's growing, but it also takes the carbon in the air when something is built. It absorbs the carbon inside, it remediates the carbon inside, and holds it. So it's a sponge for carbon. And it's the best sponge out there. There are other materials, but hemp can do it the best. It's also fire resistant. It's bug resistant, mold resistant, pest resistant, bugs, mice, things like that. And it's hygroscopic. I think that's the right word, but it absorbs and controls moisture. So it's a natural building material, and it doesn't have any wires or booklets or instructions on how to build it. It's a plant. Okay, just get that through your mind. It's a plant, and this is I hate to sound like a cliche, but it really is an opportunity to save the world. Okay, but we got to communicate that to the earth and everybody, and that's going to take time.
Yeah, I'm just excited to have this conversation because, like you mentioned, it is totally different than any of the conversations we've had. And when we originally sort of set out this season of the Disruptors, we were talking about this idea of having this theme of sustainability. And now a lot of our episodes kind of touch on that. And this seemed to be like a perfect topic to kind of fit into there. And as we go, we'll touch on all the key aspects that you talked about. But to kind of get us started, can you kind of help us understand, when we say hemp, what exactly are we talking about? Obviously, a lot of people will associate it with marijuana and THC. And, so when we talk about just hemp in general, can you kind of help sort of set the stage for what that is?
Yeah. Okay. Number one, hemp has been around for centuries. Okay. They found hemp in buildings back in China from centuries ago. Roman architecture used it, and it was really in the background, but a very important part of the history of development of cities, homes, of our civilization, including during the colonial times, where the colonists were forced to grow hemp as a tax because it was so versatile. Because you could make rope, you could make materials for paper, for anything, and the Constitution was written on hemp paper. So what happened, though, Christopher, was in 1937, I think, the government, led by a number of very conservative business people and industrial magnates, shut us down because they realized that hemp was a challenge to the lumber industry, to oil industry, and many other of the big developing industries during that time period. And then followed by the war on drugs. Hemp is cannabis. It is cannabis. It looks like marijuana. It smells like marijuana, but it's not marijuana, because the difference between the two is hemp has below 0.3 THC, okay? And you will not get stoned living in a hemp house. You will not, it cannot do any of the psychoactive things that normal marijuana can do. But that's the hard part, the education part, and that's why it was shut down until the Farm Bill came through. So that's the major challenge of what we're going up against, is education, to let people know that this is not, marijuana in the sense of the drug. But what's happened now is that since we can now grow hemp legally, and remember, this is just for the last few years, the industry is starting. And part of what we're doing at the USHBA is to educate people about the difference about hemp and marijuana, but also create the infrastructure, get the opportunity out there for people to build the infrastructure for farmers to make a profit, to grow industrial hemp, not CBD, and I'll get into that in a minute. But we have to have industrial hemp grown. They have to be able to take it to a processing plant where it's decorticated, and then it can go out to market. But these processing plants don't come cheap. And then the final thing, and probably the most important, is what we're working on at the USHBA, and is the certifications. Okay, as an architect, everybody thinks architects are just, they wear a scarf and beret, and we're designed and we draw pretty pictures.
Turtlenecks.
No, I don't wear turtlenecks. but the bottom line is, life safety, period. It's all life safety. I'm signing something that says the building is a certified design and it's constructed correctly. Engineers, the same thing. Contractors, the same thing. And you have to understand, this has been a cottage industry for many, many years, underground too, don't forget. And so getting the certifications, which are underway, ASTM and ICC actually are working with us. Those formidable agencies, everybody goes, ooh, those are so, bureaucratic. They came to us and welcomed us because they recognized the importance of creating something different that's going to really affect global warming. So, education, certifications, and infrastructure are really the goals here, okay? And it's working. When I started this, I figured this was like a 50-year plan. And, it's going to take time, but it's moving very quickly, guys. We should have certifications for hempcrete, which is, I'll get into in a minute, the main building material right now. I thought it'd be, probably about 5 years or so, to maybe 6, but I bet you we have it within 2 years, the first certification, if not sooner.
Part of that agricultural, or not the farming bill, didn't they name hemp agricultural commodity and sort of removed it from the controlled substances? Isn't that was kind of a big win for the hemp industry?
Yeah, and you have to understand also that there's 2 types of hemps, okay? There's the industrial hemp, which is the tall, 12, 15, 20-foot plants that grow really dense like corn. And then there's the CBD hemp, which are there's like Christmas tree size, which are spaced out into the farm, 4 or 5 feet apart. And obviously the CBD market, had a huge boom in the very beginning because of what they were finding. And as it got saturated, so it's readjusting. But I've always said that the industrial hemp, which is what we need for building, is, like the Cinderella story, the ugly little sister that's going to just take over in the next few years as the CBD market comes to balance. And having the Farm Bill pass, it made it so that not only could farmers grow it legally, but it could also go over state lines, transportation, and that, it could become a marketing commodity, not only for building, but for fabric, for fiber, for plastics, for all these things. And I think what we're going through, a lot of growing pains, you've all heard about, a truckload of hemp being moved from, Iowa to, Colorado to, Wyoming or something, and it crosses the line and gets stopped because they think it's marijuana. And it's a learning curve for not only the farmers and transportation people, but also for the police. And the DIA has to come to terms also with the safety factors, okay? Because you want to know what you're growing is either, if it's CBD, for the medicinal levels, and for industrial hemp, you want to make sure that what you're growing is going to be strong and straight and be able to, be processed in these upcoming processing plants that we're working toward.
Earlier in the season, we had an episode that was all about embodied carbon and the amount of waste that happens on a construction job site. Certain material, like when you're making cement, it produces a huge amount of carbon. And on the other hand, there's hemp, which is, it sounds like it's actually better than carbon neutral. And I'll let you get into that. But from a high level, from the time the seeds are planted to when the hemp crete is placed, what does that process look like?
It's very simple, okay? And what you said about embodied carbon, we all know, I think it's 39% of the carbon being put out into the atmosphere is in construction, and concrete, steel, and aluminum are the biggest violators, if you will. Cotton also, is very, very intense for growing. Hemp is not. So the process that you're asking about, Jackson, is basically as you plant it like you would any other plant. And I'm going to talk mainly about industrial hemp, okay? The amount of water that's necessary is minimal compared to other crops, especially cotton. Pesticides are not as prevalent. You certainly have to be careful watch for bugs and stuff. But once it's grown, and remember, in some parts of the world, you can grow 2 crops a year, okay? But here in Vermont, and the Northeast and out in the West, typically it's going to be one crop. That crop, once it's processed and taken out to market, is going to save millions of trees. I mean, there's so many comparisons of everything from paper to toilet paper to building materials. How many trees have to come down for a 2x4? We have a reoccurring process. Every year we're growing more and more compared to a tree that takes 15, 20, 30 years to grow. So that's the main part of the sustainability issues, as well as by growing locally, it's part of what the goal is of LEED certification. Try to get everything local so that its transportation costs are out, and by having, we need millions of acres. Let's not fool ourselves. We need millions of acres of industrial hemp to grow, and if you have that many acres, you're going to have many processing plants. So all that hemp that is being grown in Vermont or in New York State will stay within that state because there'll be enough processors to handle it, to distribute within the borders. So every aspect of it, Jackson, is just fighting that embodied carbon. And then as far as the operational carbon, the way that hemp buildings control humidity, okay, will reduce HVAC needs. It's very, very, very slow transition that if it's -5 degrees out, you can have inside the house, a comfortable 65, and the transition of the cold or opposite the heat, it takes a very, very long time, if ever, to go to the outside levels. So the operational costs are very, very minimal, and that's why it just everything about it just covers all the issues that we're trying to fix. And I'm really, really excited to take on the challenge that the AIA and Architecture 2030 have put out there about pointing the finger at architects, because we're the ones that have to stop this carbon binge. And I want your listeners to understand that and be part of this, because we're specifying, the materials for a home or for a building. So if we're specifying, spray and insulation, which is great. I mean, listen, the R value that you get out of that is just incredible, but it's poison and it's made by petroleum. So if I start specifying hemp bat insulation or hempcrete walls, that's the start, okay? And what's really put me and my company and my association with all of our friends and workers at the USHBA and the hemp world is our little building in Denver, which is called the Wonder Workshop. That was chosen by Architecture 2030 as one of 3 buildings in the world as an example of hempcrete construction. And they called me, I got this call and they said, would it be all right? And I said, well, of course. How could you turn something like that down? So it's being recognized, guys, as this. And again, it'll take a little time because we have to grow it, we have to certify it, we have to process it. But when it does happen, it will change the industry as a major disruptor.
I've never held a block of hempcrete before, but I'd imagine it's pretty light. And although it's not necessarily a structural component, I feel like it would reduce the amount of concrete needed for foundations because it is so light.
Yes. Yeah, let me make one thing very clear, and I'm glad you brought this up. Hempcrete is not a substitute or anything challenging to concrete, okay? It's a misnomer, okay? And that's one of the things in our hemp world that we're trying to find a balance of what to call this, whether it's hemp lime or hempcrete. Hempcrete is not for foundations. Hempcrete cannot touch the ground because its natural characteristics and properties absorb moisture. And as you mentioned, Jackson, it's not structural. A hempcrete wall, a hempcrete building like we did at the Wonder Workshop, has a stud wall inside of it. It's very good in lateral structurally, but in compression, it needs a structure inside of it. So, but we can blend it, guys. We can blend it into concrete, the fibers, for strength, for flexibility, as well as taking out, the embodied carbon that it takes for carbon when they make hempcrete, or I'm sorry, concrete. So that's part of it. That it's the blending, and we're not going to put concrete out of business, believe me, and we don't want to. We have no intention to, and it'd be impossible. And to concrete industry's credit, they're doing an awful lot of research and development in getting their carbon footprint down. They have to, and they recognize that.
Is hempcrete the predominant hemp material currently being used in the building industry?
Yeah, right now, and as I mentioned earlier, this has been a cottage industry for many, many decades in the United States, even though in Europe and Asia and Africa, it's been a certified material for a number of decades. So we need to catch up. But you know what, can we stop that? Rephrase, I forgot what the question was, if you could ask that again.
No.
Sorry about that yesterday.
Yeah, no, I had to edit something out Jackson said. So I was asking about hempcrete. Yeah, so is hempcrete the predominant building material being used in the industry?
Right now, yes. And the way that it's been built, and the way I learned and the way we built the Wonder Workshop, is by forming it like you're forming a concrete wall. And you have to understand that because it's so new in the United States, that this has been the predominant way to build. In Europe and Asia and Africa, it's been legal to build with hempcrete for a couple of decades. Okay, so they're much further along. But by doing the form work and building these walls, embedding the stud wall within it, right now is pretty much the main way people have been building, both in the cottage industry as well as in the last couple of years. But the future for really quality as well as certifiable and reliable hempcrete walls, is by building with block and panels. Okay, the way you build it with the forms is imperfect, and it's because the labor changes day by day. It takes a lot of time, and that's not going to work in our industry. By having factory produced block of hempcrete blocks and factory produced hempcrete panels, like a modular home, that's a controlled process of building, and that's the only way I feel personally that it's going to be able to be competitive in the construction market in the beginning. And they're doing that in Europe too.
Yeah, because we hear a lot about how prefab modular is trying to take hold more because of the need to have less people on a job site, to be able to produce more efficient, all those buzzwords we hear. So it makes a lot of sense that would just sort of fold nicely into that workflow.
Yeah, and the cast in place method is absolutely fabulous, and I recommend everybody to go and learn that way, because you get your hands dirty. You're involved in not only the mixing of the hemp, which is, you basically have the hemp hurd, which is the inside of the stalk, the shiv they call it, because when you take the plant to be decorticated, it's basically, everybody knows that hemp fiber is wicked strong for anything. But it takes a very special machine to separate that. It's like skinning a snake. So once they get the hurd out of it, it's chopped up into little woody chips and added with lime and water and some additional additives depending on where you are, environment and climate. But you mix it just like concrete. And then you talk about the weight, Jackson. It's like 25% of, if you have a bucket, a 5-gallon bucket of hempcrete, you and I, even, a kid could carry that. You fill that up with concrete, forget it, it's heavy. So you take that, you mix it, you put it in the bucket, and then you put it within the forms that way. So it's the best way to learn, okay? But it's not going to be competitive in the industry. And there are classes out there. There are, and part of the USHBA's function is to educate not only zoning administrators and the government, but also to provide opportunities and networks for people around the country to find out where there are classes. And YouTube is just loaded with seminars and webinars and classes. It's a great place to start.
A great place for home maintenance tips as well.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, because I grew up in the Houston area, which has perhaps the worst weather in the United States in terms of humidity. So when it comes to growing hemp as well as its application in buildings. Is it different depending on the climate that you're in? Whether you're in a really dry climate or a really humid climate, both for growing it as well as, its application within the built environment?
Yes, okay, and you're getting a little bit out of my pay scale. It comes down to genetics, okay,
Okay.
okay, and that's part of the development of what the industry is working on, is that the best genetics for the seeds for the Northeast may not be the best ones for Texas, and vice versa, okay, and there are other people that can speak better about that than I can, but Texas is becoming a very fast leader in growing hemp, and number one, because you got the land and all that other stuff, and the farms and the interest, but it's if you're in an environment like you're talking about in Houston compared to New York State or Colorado, um, it's it'll be different growing, and of course the amount of water, the rain, the heat, and that's part of the challenge. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up. Um, as a farmer, and part of the thing we have to convince them to change from other crops over to hemp, and especially industrial hemp, is that there's a risk that when you're growing the hemp, it can get hot. And when I say hot, that means it could go over the 0.3 THC level. So there's a lot of, my son Alex, who got me into this, he has his own mobile processing company that is very busy right now, helping farmers in the CBD market, trimming and getting their crops ready to send out to market for CBD. But they have to really do tests at the last few weeks, maybe a month and a half prior to harvest, to make sure that the THC level is low. Okay, and the amount of, as I understand it, if it's too hot or too cold or too much rain, the environment and climate, if it's unusual, can spike the THC level, as well as where you take that test from, whether it's from a bud or from the stem or from a leaf. And part of the legalization of growing hemp, and this is stuff I never knew as an architect, a farmer, if he's grown for a whole season 10 acres or 100 acres of hemp, and suddenly it's over 0.3, he's got to destroy it. Okay, that that's marijuana according to the government.
There's no way to get that down at all once it's reached that limit.
No,
as far as we know,
it depends. I guess I don't know exactly that answer, but if it's 0.3, 0.1 or something, there may be ways to harvest it earlier, and things like that. And again, that's for someone else to talk about. But if I got to destroy my crop, I've lost everything. And farmers want insurance, which they have for peas, for corn, for soy, and that's been very difficult to get into the agricultural industry, just because of bureaucracy, and it takes time for that. And it's happening. But once that insurance is fully in place, then there's at least some feeling of security that a farmer that's, if the hemp gets hot that he can't control, will be reimbursed. But in Texas, compared to New York State, where the heat is a lot more intense, I'll make a bet that those farmers are watching it very carefully.
As we kind of wrap up, I think that's a great lead into, from the research that I've done, just the brief research and listening to you, it seems, I'm not gonna say a no-brainer, but it seems like hemp as a material has so many benefits. And so, but we also know that it's met with lots of challenges and obstacles. Kind of from your perspective, what are some of the greatest challenges and obstacles that we're facing with using hemp as a sustainable building material?
I guess the best answer would be, as I mentioned before, education, certifications, and infrastructure. But education, that's the first part, okay? Just to get the government officials and the zoning officials and the general public to know what they're dealing with. Once that gets through, I don't think the challenges are going to be really insurmountable in the sense of the construction industry fighting us as far as the competition that we're going to create. Because again, my point of view is blending, and I think that once these industries, especially insulation industry, concrete industry, plastics, once they realize that there's an alternative to petroleum-based components to their product, they're going to jump on this, okay? And it's going to take time, and there's going to be ups and downs. We see it now. We see it in the spirit of the politics and of the corporation and investments. All these new companies coming out. Some go under, some flourish. But the most important thing, guys, is that whatever we do, and as an architect, this is so important to me, as well as so important to the U.S. Hemp Building Association, that we have to make sure what we're building is quality, because we cannot afford any failures in a public realm, okay? And if you know how the industry is, any problems that a building has, it's instant news about all these problems, and we got to be very careful. And that's why I've always said, build small first. Don't go for if you're just starting, don't go for a home. Don't go for anything bigger than that. Learn with outbuildings. Learn with garages. Start small so that you can work these things through. And we can do residential in the world that we're in right now, because so many of the cities and towns, the zoning, if you can prove to the zoning officials, like we did in Denver, that it's an alternative material, that they all have two things. They all have alternative material criteria, that if it's as good as or better, you can substitute it. But they all have goals of getting the carbon footprint down. And if you express this to the building officials that, hey, look, you guys are going to be part of bringing the carbon footprint down in your city or town, this is why you want to do hemp. And that I think is what's going to do it. And I think that's what's going to really sell it. And at the same time, the blending into materials, especially plastics. I mean, God, you just see what's going on in the junk and the floating plastics out in the oceans, and in the pollution in Haiti and other countries of plastics that just don't biodegrade. Hemp, if it's put into that, will help remediate those problems and help in the the biodegradation of plastics. And one last thing I just want to point out, we talked about construction and materials like that. There is studies going on that are very, very, very positive, and you can look this up, that hemp can become a hemp building, a hemp material, if it's produced right, can be a battery. Okay, so in the simplest terms, just think of a town built of hempcrete structures. Not only is a carbon sponge, but also you can plug your phone into the wall and charge it. Okay, I mean, that's in the future, please understand. And I've also pointed out in many cases for the future that if we're going into outer space like we're doing right now, in the future of development of space stations, to if we're going to build scientific stations on Mars or the moon, I'm talking 100 years from now, we got to have farms, okay? And if there's the old saying of man needs food, clothing, and shelter. Okay, hemp is food, hemp is clothing, and hemp is shelter. So if I'm going in outer space, I'm bringing hemp seeds with me, okay? Because it'll do all three of those things. And we're not going to be around to experience that, but that's where my mind is, not only to respect the past, to understand and develop the present, but also to be wary of what hemp can do for the future, for the planet, for the construction industry, for architects, and all the way down to, the guy installing the insulation.
Bob, you've made me want to run through a wall and rebuild it with Hempcrete. This has been awesome. We really appreciate you coming on. I know both Christopher and I learned a lot. I'm really happy that we got to have this conversation, and, really happy that, we got to meet. So thank you. And yeah.
It's been a pleasure. And I hope I disrupted your podcast the way it should be.
Absolutely. No, it's a great discussion. Like I said, I mean, we haven't had anything like this one. I think it was a great first conversation, and, hopefully leads to more future conversations. And
one last thing in closing. The cottage industry that has been around in the United States for decades, we have total respect for what they've done to get us to where we are right now. But we need the certifications, education, and infrastructure in order to bring it into that construction market. And I want to reassure your listeners that the industry is growing with professionals, okay? It's growing. Not only we have the hempsters from way back, but we have professionals that know the construction industry and how to bring it in to it, okay? But remember, we're creating something from scratch. And how exciting is that to be part of that? So please, I hope that the word can get out. There's so many opportunities out there for architects, engineers, and contractors who love their work, but at the same time, why not do something different?
Yeah, I think it's great. Well, we really do enjoy you being here, and thank you so much.